This is honestly one of my favorite things I've seen in political, alternative media recently. And it's Candace Owens interviewing Briahna Joy Gray. And I'm not going to show the whole thing, but near the end, they really get into some deep stuff. And I think the thing I like about Candace Owens, because she's a little too religious, right? For me, like very like Christian and all that. And I came up in a very religious, like authoritarian environment in Utah, which is a state that's run by the Mormon Church, very conservative, very like from top down, the church runs that state. Like you could argue, oh, maybe not. No, they do. The Mormon Church owns Utah. It's their state. They are a huge business. So I'm very skeptical of, the religion thing. But the thing I like about Candace Owens is she's consistent. And I've always said this. I'm like, if you're pro-life, how can you be for the death penalty or for war? You're like, I'm pro-life, but the death penalty, I'm for that too. It's like, dude, that's incongruent. That doesn't make any sense to me. But if you're consistent and you're like, look, the death penalty kills a lot of people who have, who were innocent, like there's proof of that people have been executed and then exonerated after they were executed by the state. People that can make that connection. Hey, I'm pro-life when it comes to abortion, but I'm also pro-life when it across the board. I respect you. I might not agree with you in principle because with abortion, I think there are way more dynamics, just like with the COVID thing. Anyway, let's watch some of this because it's just a lot of really great stuff. And both of these women were kind of targeted for speaking truth. Let's crank this up.
Don't want to debate. They don't want to debate. I've reached out. I've tried to have people on for a debate. They don't want to debate. And the only people that don't want to debate their ideas while they're sitting and they're talking down to you and they're telling you that they're right and you're wrong and you're an anti-Semite are the people that are lying. That's my view. You're a liar, okay?
Yes! Already, right out the gate, fire. You have to love this.
Because I'm Candace, I don't have all of the degrees that the rest of these people have who think that they're so smart and they're so brilliant. Wouldn't you just think that you would slam me in a debate? I'm so dumb and you're so smart and you're so wise and you just need to teach us things. If the Israel argument is valid, sit down and debate it with somebody who is against the Israel argument. That's it. And let people watch it and let people observe it and let people move their opinion one way or the other. But I do want to ask you, Briahna, because we don't have much time here, a lot of stuff is also happening in Congress.
And that right there, that is such a great point. If your debate holds up, if you're not afraid of that your ideas will crumble, why would you dodge that? Why wouldn't you be proud to go stand next to a person who disagrees with you and defend your viewpoints? So she's making a great point there. That's honestly something I've never really connected the dots on. These people are lying. They don't want to open debate because they're liars.
No, if you caught Thomas Massie, he's my favorite congressman ever. I am a Thomas Massie stan. He sat down with Tucker Carlson and he said,
I'm also kind of a Thomas Massie stan. And the thing I love so much about this is these are two figures from political extremes. You would say political extreme. Briahna would be called far left because she worked for Bernie Sanders. And Candace will be called far right because she worked for Ben Shapiro, which, both of those, there's truth in both of those claims. But it's great to see these two people with, different viewpoints coming together on an issue where they've both had experiences. We'll just leave it at that, experiences.
Essentially, every Republican in Congress, except for him, has an AIPAC handler. An AIPAC handler. We have seen the strength of AIPAC. We have seen the strength of the ADL. We talked about in monologue, which you didn't get to see, how Trump couldn't get this thing done. He wanted to ban TikTok, because he had concerns about China. Suddenly, John Greenblatt swoops in and it's gone. TikTok has got to go, or at least it passes in the House. And immediately you start to realize who's actually controlling Congress.
You know who John Greenblatt is, right? He's the guy from the ADL. And we have Kanye's opinion on
ADL is played out. Nobody knows who the ADL are. Stop giving them attention. Nobody cares about the ADL.
Yeah, and it's not just Republicans. I followed the Massey AIPAC challenge very closely because it mirrors, frankly, the kind of challenges we've been seeing on the left for quite some time. The left, not liberals, who I am frequently a critic of, I think I critique more than any other group, is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about real progressives, to the left of Bernie, frankly, have frequently found themselves in the exact same situation as Thomas Massey, because it is, again, the one and true only red line on a bipartisan basis that nobody on either side of the aisle is allowed to cross. So you've seen these mounting AIPAC challenges from candidates like Anita Turner in Ohio's 11th district. Summer Lee was able to survive her challenge. You're seeing Jamal Bowman in New York getting challenged along these lines. And you're seeing a lot of, and I know that you have an interest in kind of the craven weaponization of identity politics and the exploitation of race to lend cover to what are, frankly, in this case, kind of a foreign policy agenda, but are often sort of corporate policy agendas. And there's often overlap between the two. As we're talking about Israel, we can't not talk about defense contracting and Boeing and why there is so much incentive to continue this war along with so many others. But what you see is that.
And if you remember that clip I played at the beginning, the far right guys at the AFPAC thing outside, what were they shouting? F the war contractors by name.
Particularly people like Richie Torres, Congress members who are Black and brown, are often weaponized to advance the interests of Israel in this case. Hakeem Jeffries, also from New York, frequently famously says Israel is the sixth borough. Mayor Adams, unsurprisingly, is a big advocate for Israel. And I think they try to disguise the extent to which there is a conflict of interest there between the average working class American and the interests that are being pushed by a foreign lobby.
And let's be honest, that's a practice that spills over to everything. It's not just Israel doing that. It's Boeing, it's, the pharma lobby, they're all doing this. The difference is we're sending a ton of money to, well, I guess there's not a difference. We're giving a ton of money to pharma and those other interests too. So what am I saying?
By dressing it up in the veneer of a trusted Black representative. On the other hand, and I think we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, those Black representatives and leaders, political leaders that don't fall in line are subject to particular scrutiny and particularly forceful push.
Jamal Bowman, for example.
Back. And I think that's part of what you experience, is part of what I experienced. The Stop Anti-Semitism account recently decided to post a picture of a random Black high school student who had said that they want to free Palestine, really targeting in particular Black people, because I think they're capitalizing on this stereotype that because there is, I think, a longstanding tradition of Black people kind of empathizing with the situation of Palestinians, because frankly, it is familiar, that we have historically also been tarred with the label anti-Semite, and it's a method to effectively shut down conversations about this issue.
That's exactly right. And I do actually totally agree with you that there does seem this particular targeting of Black American voices, and I can't figure that out. I don't know why it is, but you're labeled anti-Semite from Michael Jackson, me, and I'm going, what are you talking about? There's literally no record of this. I've worked for Jewish companies my entire life. How did I just become a raging anti-Semite simply because I have questions about what is happening to these innocent Palestinian children and why we...
That is such a great point. She's worked for Ben Shapiro for years, and it wasn't until this became an issue that there was a rift. So people forget that, all of a sudden she's a violent anti-Semite.
We are treating them like their lives don't matter. Again, my position is that what we're...
The irony of that, treating them like their lives don't matter, like a certain other protest that happened a couple of years ago, kind of highlighting how a lot of people are treated like their lives don't matter. And, I'm not going to go too far down this trail, but again, I see the same dynamic with Ashley Babbitt at the, January 6th thing. It's like, be consistent. I am not for brute force, deadly force being used against people who are not using deadly force themselves. They can take these kids who do mass shootings that just mowed down an entire classroom of kids alive. But somehow a guy who used a counterfeit bill gets choked to death in the street, and we're supposed to be okay with that. It's the same dynamic at play with all of this shit. So this next part, Candace goes pretty hard, and I think it's one of my favorite parts of this interview, just based on the stuff that she's saying here. So listen to this and let's talk about it.
Also been tarred with the label anti-Semite, and it's a method to effectively shut down conversations about this issue.
That's exactly right. And I do actually totally agree with you that there does seem this particular targeting of Black American voices, and I can't figure that out. I don't know why it is, but you're labeled anti-Semite from Michael Jackson, me, and I'm going, what are you talking about? There's literally no record of this. I've worked for Jewish companies my entire life. How did I just become a raging anti-Semite? Simply because I have questions about what is happening to these innocent Palestinian children and why we are treating them like their lives don't matter. Again, my position is that what we're seeing operating in the media are racial supremacists. And I think that they're taking the wrong side here. I feel it. You can sense it in the air. People are starting to ask questions. People are seeing what is happening to people. There seems to be an awakening on this issue. And let me tell you, if this awakening speeds up, and I think it is, it's catalyzing, people are going to look back and they're going to remember these voices that sat there and supported racial supremacy because they didn't want to lose their jobs, that supported racial supremacy, supported the death of innocent children, who are out there saying outrageous things, applauding the death of children as long as they get back one person, as opposed to saying, no, this conflict needs to come to an end because too many children are dying. I have no regrets in what I've said. I have no regrets in the way that I've been treated in the media, because at the end of the day, my relationship doesn't matter with the boss. It matters with God. And
so this is where Candace kind of loses me a little bit with the religious piety stuff, but she's consistent, in her views, which I respect. So let's keep going.
They're all going to have to account to God one day. And you can see these psychopaths in media, that are trying to sell you something different and tell you that there's something wrong with you or you're perverted because you feel bad for a dead child that you are seeing on your screen. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be those people when you have to meet the ultimate boss one day and really account for what you've created. And
well said. Very well said.
Throughout your life.
Yeah, Candace, I would love to just speak to that Jewish supremacy point, if I could, to clarify for some people who...
I thought this was funny because Candace goes pretty hard right there, and Brie kind of softens it a little bit here. It's good, though. It's good dynamic.
Might hear that phraseology and find it to be a little bit dissonant. I just want to say that, obviously, I think we can all understand that any supremacy movement is a problem. Mm-hmm. We are, I think, so rightly appalled by the horrors of the Holocaust, and we have been so that has been emphasized and taught to us so strongly in our education as we grow up, rightly so, that I think the idea of even thinking about Jewish supremacy is sometimes difficult to wrap your brain around because we're so focused on the opposite, right? Anti-Semitism and the relatively recent historical tragedy that ended up killing 2/3 of the world's Jewish population in a horrible Holocaust, right? And I want to just really address that dissonance, because what I'm talking about, and I think what you were talking about when we're talking about supremacy, is an ideology that I think is required to support Zionism, but which is not fundamental to Judaism as a whole.
Correct.
And there has
Judaism
been this effort,
is not Zionism.
Right. There's been this effort to conflate the two because we all abhor the notion of being anti.
It's like saying the Bush administration or the Trump administration is Christianity, right? Because they claim to be Christian in their values when they're, clearly not.
Semitic, right? And I think there is a sensitivity to that Zionists are aware of, and so they know that it's easier to marginalize someone for being anti-Semitic than anti-Zionist, because what is Zionism? Zionism is a particular political belief that thinks that there should be a Jewish state established in a part of the world that is overwhelmingly Arab. And when you do that, it requires you to establish a demographic majority to not allow Palestinians to, for instance, have the right of return. That a Jewish person who was born in New York or Philadelphia or Iowa is able to have the right even if they've never stepped foot in that region, to move there, whereas a Palestinian who has keys to the house that they owned before they were expelled in the Nakba in 1948 is not allowed to visit the country. Where Palestinians who work in Israel via work permits are forced to wait for hours at checkpoints, or who need to get better hospital care than is available to them in the occupied territories, have to wait even if their health is imperiled, because there's different roads and different rules for Palestinians, for Arabs in Israel. This is an apartheid state. It's a two-tiered state that specifically gives different rights, superior rights, to people who are Jewish as opposed to people who are Muslim and Arab. And I say Arab and Muslim separately because there are Christian Arabs in Gaza who have their churches being bombed, who are themselves being killed. Justin Amash, the libertarian former Congress member, had multiple family members killed by U.S.-backed airstrikes earlier in this conflict, and you almost heard nothing about it. No condemnations from Congress for a former sitting U.S. Congress member, Palestinian American Congress members, own young family members being massacred by Israeli bombs with American political cover. That's what we're talking about here. And all of the problems of the region can be traced back to the insistence that Palestinians and Jewish Israelis cannot have the same rights within the state of Israel, because if that happened, there would be demographic parity, the same number of Palestinians as Israelis. And that would, we're told, necessarily imperil the safety of Jewish Israelis. Now, let me ask you this, Candace. Does it make sense to you to simultaneously be making an argument that Israel is a democratic country that we should be loving and supporting? Because look, 20% of the population is Arab and we all live peacefully, and isn't that wonderful? But also to be making the argument that we can't have any more Palestinians because they're inherently violent, they're inherently regressive, they will ruin our society if they come into the country.
Well, that's what I'm speaking to when I talk about this dehumanization of Palestinians.
So just to pause there for a second, did you see the video that Jimmy Dore and Dudison's played of the white lady freaking out at the Hasidic Jews? She starts by saying, you're Jewish, why are you doing this? Because they're, opposing the, slaughter. And then halfway through it, she's like, you're not Jewish, and she's just like throwing a tantrum because these people that are clearly Jewish have a different view than she does. And I think it just speaks so much to how privileged we are as Americans. And I want to take this sidebar again to show you something that I think is interesting, because I have a lot of heroes who are Jewish, whether it's rappers like the Beastie Boys or A$AP Rock, to Albert Einstein, to whatever. So, but the idea that Jewish people are like a downtrodden minority in America is laughable. And I'm going to show you what the data behind that. Here it is. How many people on the Forbes list are Jewish? American Jews made up as many as 30% of the richest 100 in 2009 and 139 of the Forbes 400. So if you can agree that outside of, the white male privilege that someone like me has by Congress being largely stacked with white elderly males, the other power dynamic is money. Money is the biggest decider. And let's look at how many Black people are on the Forbes list. 9 Black Americans. So, that right there, there's 9 Black people on the list versus 100. And this was in 2000. So, this is in 2021 versus like 139 Jewish people. So, when you see that kind of power dynamic, it's clear, again, I've often said, if I was going to be religious, I'm not religious, I would be a Jew. I would be Jewish. I would convert to Jew. If someone held a gun to my head and said, hey, you have to pick one, that's probably the one I would pick. But again, you have to look at this through a lens clearly of reality. And Jewish people are not threatened here in the United States. They are largely in a lot of positions of power. I would argue probably next to like white European males like myself. A lot of Jews are European. That's the other thing. They're from Poland and Eastern European countries. So this idea that Jewish people are still a downtrodden minority. Yes, the Holocaust happened. Yes, it was terrible. Yes, we need to be wary of that and defensive about it. But it doesn't mean you get to use it as the excuse, to commit atrocities of your own. All right, let's get back to this video because there's a few more good points in here that they hit on.
That's happening right now in the media. It's disgusting. And like I said, I would say I'm agnostic on the issue. I want to learn more, which is why I'm trying to have a debate with somebody who is, radically pro-Zionist. I don't have an issue with the fact that you're radically pro-Zionist. What I have an issue with is that you speak down to people as if you are a superior and you won't debate your ideas, right? I have an issue with the fact that you're speaking about, the Arab population, who, by the way, are Semitic. You're talking about anti-Semitism and these are Semitic people. You're speaking about them in this way.
Just like Gene Simmons said.
That makes me uncomfortable. My grandfather grew up in a segregated South. I'm not comfortable with the way you're speaking about them. And when you try to shut down my conversation and you speak to me in that same way, you are acting like a racial supremacist. And we have to have the courage to call that out. And of course, it's not all Jewish people. Some people genuinely just are like, I want the hostages to be returned. I am concerned. I followed some Jewish influencers who have been so understanding. There are people that you listen to them and you're like, this makes sense. They're not being pushy. They're not being supremacist. They are obviously concerned. They grew up in Israel. Their family grew up in Israel as Jews, because this was after 1945 or, within the last 30 years. And they are not disgusting in the way that they are talking about this issue. But it feels like a lot of people in the media are. And that's what makes me uncomfortable. They are very disgusting and matter of fact. And, oh, well, we've got bigger bombs and who cares how many Muslims you kill? I care because I'm a Christian and I'm not comfortable with the amount of death that is happening to children. How dare I call myself a pro-life conservative and then stay mum on this issue? How dare I call myself a Christian, a child of God, and then be mum on this issue because I care about money? And
you have to applaud someone that is consistent in their values because it's so rare in today's world. And again, applaud you, Candace, for sticking to your guns on this.
So that's kind of where I want people to really consider listening to this podcast. Are you comfortable with the amount of death of innocent children? And to check yourself, have you been brainwashed to believe that it doesn't matter if an Arab child is killed? Are you comfortable? And let me also push you on this to my listeners. If you say it's okay when a state does this, then you better hope you remain friends with that state. Because if they ever turn their arms against you and you've already set the groundwork for believing that it does not matter when innocent children are murdered, when they are waking up to bombs being dropped on them, then you're going to have to stand by those words. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, I would also point out, I think your point about children is really well made. I remember, I believe you were pregnant when you were talking with Norm Finkelstein, and I could tell how much you were impacted by him, also bringing up the lack of maternal health care that's available. I mean, maternal health care, forget that. I mean, clean water and food available to so many pregnant women in Gaza, babies that have been born into this conflict who have been killed by this conflict. I mean, the whole thing is terrible. But we're also having new reporting just over the last few days about a torture camp that exists in Israel where, and I'm sorry, this is so graphic, but Palestinian men have been having metal electric rods inserted into their rectums as a kind of torture. We've had ample reports of rapes that are substantiated. And I got to say, I'm sorry, there have been ample reports discrediting the New York Times reporting about the quote unquote mass rapes that happened on October 7th, including most recently in the Times of London.
So again, we were talking earlier about the difference in media, right? That older people who consume legacy media still believe that stuff. They still believe this is justified. It's okay to stick a metal rod up someone's ass because, mass rape and dead babies, whatever you need. And that's the big differentiating factor between the generations, I think, right now is people who still pay attention to legacy media and take it seriously and don't view it with extreme skepticism, and then people like us who watch alternative news and have known this stuff for a long time.
Really destroying all of the sources that were used in that initial reporting that was so controversial even within the New York Times that its own daily podcast department declined to do a podcast on the story because it was so riddled with obvious inconsistencies and reporting errors. So that was headline news. That was front page news. When Joe Biden lied about there being 40 beheaded babies, that was front page news. And the retraction is just a blip. His people coming forward and saying, oh, he didn't actually see that. It didn't actually happen. That's just a blip. And meanwhile, the Times finally reported on this torture camp where they're sodomizing Palestinian prisoners. It's at the bottom of a lengthy article that did not get the above the fold treatment that the original reporting did. And so again, you're seeing the asymmetry in the value of life. One other point that The Intercept and some other organizations have been tracking the use of language when describing Palestinian deaths versus Israeli deaths. And words like barbaric, savage, horrible, kind of more emotive words are used 60 times as frequently when discussing Hamas killing Israelis versus Israelis killing Palestinian civilians.
And that's how you manufacture consent with the boomers, right? They're like, well, they did all this really horrible stuff, so that you get what you fuck around and find out.
And so we are all being taught by the media how to interpret this crisis in incredibly subtle ways and also in very overt ways. And that's, I think, a reason why it's so important for you to be independent, to be able to speak out boldly without worry that you are going to be censorshiped by a parent organization the way they attempted to censor you and the way I have been censored. And I personally
Censorship.
am very grateful for the existence of independent media platforms.
I want to say, everybody, like, don't lose your values, like, just do not lose your values in the sea of everything going on. There are so many hot button issues. People are scared, whether we're talking about, people scared to speak up about transgenderism in children, or whether you're talking about, what's happening in Palestine and Israel. You should speak your values and expect that when you do something that is right, the world will open up to you. So, Briahna, I am wishing you the most luck. Can you allow us to know where we can follow you?
So there you have it. That I thought that was a really great interview, and cheers to Candace Owens again for sticking to her guns. And hey, look at that. Now you have two prominent Black female voices, one from the far left and one from the far right, who have kind of experienced the same thing, have like a shared experience of political censorship that they can unite on. And you can see how none of that stuff matters anymore. Left, right, liberal, conservative. It's all a fucking facade. It's all a, manufactured matrix that we are supposed to live in to ensure that, we just comfortably accept the 2 donor-approved candidates for office every cycle. Whether it's getting worse. I think it's really starting to bleed down to a local level now. Whereas before it was always just like, well, you're either blue or red or left or right, and you got to pick the Republican or the Democrat. And people are past that now. And I think the silver lining to all this death and destruction that we've been responsible for over the last several years is that it's really peeled the mask off. And a lot of people who might not have seen it before are really seeing what's going on for what it actually is. So